Yo, welcome back, guys. My name is Dr. Swain Zoom, and today we're going to see Unit 2 of Nationalism in Europe. The making of nationalism in Europe. If you look at the map of mid 18th century Europe, you will find that there was no nation states as we know them today. What we know today as Germany, Italy, Switzerland were divided into kingdoms, duchies, and cantons, whose ruler had their autonomous territories. Eastern and Central Europe were under autocratic monarchies within the territories of which lived diverse people. They did not see themselves as a sharing of a collective identity or common culture. Often, they spoke different languages and belonged to different ethnic groups. The Habsburg Empire that ruled over Austria-Hungary, for example, was a patchwork of many different regions and people. It included Alpine regions, the Tyrol, Austria, and Sudetenland, as well as Bohemia, where the autocracy was predominantly German-speaking. It also included the Italian-speaking provinces of Lombardy and Venetia. In Hungary, half of the population spoke Magyar, and while the other spoke a variety of dialects. In Galicia, the autocracy spoke Polish. Besides these three dominant groups, there also lived within the boundaries of the empire a mass subject of peasant people. The Bohemians and Slovaks to the north, the Sovniales and Carniola Croats to the south, the Romans to the east in Transylvania. Such differences did not easily promote a sense of political unity. The only tie binding these diverse groups together was a common allegiance to the emperor, the autocracy, and the new middle class. Socially and politically, a landed autocracy was the dominant class on the continent. The members of this class united by a common way of life that cut across regional divisions. They owned estates in the countryside and also town houses. They spoke French for purposes of diplomacy in high society. Their families were often connected by ties of marriages. This powerful autocracy was, however, numerically a small group. The majority of the population was made up of peasantry. To the west, the bulk of land was farmed by tenants and small owners, while in the eastern and central Europe, the pattern of landholding was characterized by vast estates which were cultivated by serfs. In western and parts of central Europe, the growth of industrial production and trade meant the growth of towns and the emergence of commercial classes whose existence was based on production for the market. Industrialization began in England in the second half of the 18th century, but in France and other parts of German states, it occurred only during the 19th century. In its wake, new social groups came into being. A working class of population and middle classes made up of industrialists, businessmen, and professionals. In Eastern and Central Europe, these groups were smaller in number till late 19th century. It was among the educated liberal middle classes that ideas of national unity following the abolition of autocratic privileges gained popularity. What did liberal nationalism stand for? Ideas of national unity in the 18th century Europe were closely allied to the ideology of liberalism. The term liberalism derives from the Latin root liber, meaning free. For the new middle classes, liberalism stood for freedom, freedom for the individual and equality of all before the law. Politically, it emphasized the concept of a government by consent. Since the French Revolution, liberalism has stood for the end of autocracy and clerical privileges. A constitutional and representative government through parliament, 19th century liberals also stretched the inviolability of private property. Yet equality before the law did not necessarily stand for universal suffrage. You will recall that in revolutionary France, which marked the first political experiment in liberal democracy, the right to vote and to get elected was granted exclusively to property owning men. Men without property and all women were excluded from political rights. Only for a brief period under the Jacobins did all adult males enjoy suffrage. However, the Napoleonic Code went back to limited suffrage and reduced women to the status of a minor, subject to authority of fathers and husbands. Throughout the 19th century and early 20th centuries, women and non-propertied men organized opposition movements demanding equal political rights. In the economic sphere, liberalism stood for the freedom of markets and the abolition of state-imposed restrictions on the movement of goods and capital. During the 19th century, this was a strong demand of emerging middle classes. Let us take the example of German-speaking regions in the first half of the 19th century. Napoleon's administrative measures had created, out of countless small principalities, a confederation of 39 states. Each of these possessed its own currency and weight and measures. A merchant traveling in 1833 from Hamburg to Nuremberg to sell his goods have to pass through 11 custom barriers and pay a custom duties about 5% at each one of them. Duties were often levied according to the weight measurement of the goods. As each region had its own system of weights and measures, this involved time calculation. This measure of cloth, for example, was the elli, which in each region stood for a different length. An elli of textile material bought in Frankfurt would get you 54.7 cm of cloth. In Mainz, 55.1. In Nuremberg, 65.6. In Freiburg, 53.5. Such conditions were viewed as obstacles to economic exchange and growth by new commercial classes who argued for the creation of new unified economic territory, allowing the unhindered movements of goods, people, and capital. In 1834, a customs union of Sloverin was formed at the initiative of Prussia and joined by most German states. The union abolished tariff barriers and reduced the number of currencies over 30 to 2. The creation of a network of railways further simulated mobility, harnessing economic interest to national unification. A wave of economic nationalism strengthened the wider nationalist sentiments growing at the time. 2.3. A new conservatism after 1815. Following the defeat of Napoleon in 1815, European governments were driven by a spirit of conservatism. Conservatives believed that established traditional institutions of society and state, like the monarchy, the church, social hierarchies, properties, and the family, should be preserved. Most conservatives, however, did not propose a return to the society of pre-revolutionary days. Rather, they realized the changes initiated by Napoleon and the modernization could in fact strengthen the traditional institutions like monarchy. It could make state power more effective and strong. A modern army, an efficient bureaucracy, a dynamic economy, and an abolition of feudalism and serfdom could strengthen the autocratic monarchies of Europe. In 1815, representatives of European power, Britain, Russia, Prussia, and Austria, had collectively defeated Napoleon, met Vienna to draw up a settlement for Europe. The Congress was hosted by Austrian Chancellor Metternich. The delegates drew up the Treaty of Vienna of 1815 with the object of undoing most changes that had come about in Europe during the Napoleonic Wars. The Bourbon dynasty, which had deposed during the French Revolution, was restored to power, and France lost the territory it has annexed under Napoleon. A series of states were set up on the boundaries of France to prevent French expansion in the future. Thus, the Kingdom of Netherlands, which included Belgium, was set up in the north and Genoa was added to Piedmont in the south. Prussia was given important new territories on its way to the western frontiers, while Austria was given control of northern Italy, but the German Confederation of 39 states had been set up by Napoleon was left untouched. In the east, Russia was given a part of Poland while Prussia was given a portion of Saxony. The main intention was to restore the monarchies that had been overthrown by Napoleon and create a new conservative order in Europe. Conservative regimes set up in 1850 were autocratic. They did not tolerate criticism and dissent and sought to curb activities that questioned the legitimacy of autocratic governments. Most of them imposed censorship laws to control what was said in the newspapers, books, plays, and songs, and reflected the ideas of liberty and freedom associated with the French Revolution. The memory of the French Revolution nonetheless continued to inspire liberates. One of the major issues taken by the liberal nationalists who criticized the new conservative order was freedom of the press. 2.4 Revolutionaries. During the years following 1815, the fear of repression drove many liberal nationalists underground. Secret societies sprang up in many European states to train revolutionary and spread their ideas. To be revolutionary at this time meant a commitment to propose monarchical forms that had been established after the Vienna Congress to fight for liberty and freedom. Most of these revolutionaries also saw the creation of nation states as a necessary of this struggle for freedom. One such individual in the Italian revolutionary was Giuseppe Mazzini. Born in Genoa in 1807, he became the member of the secret society of Carbonari. As a young man of 24, he was sent into exile in 1831 for attempting a revolution in Liguria. He subsequently founded two more underground societies, first Young Italy in Marseilles and then Young Europe in Berne, whose members were like-minded young people from Poland, France and Italy. Mazzini believed that God had intended nations to be the natural units of mankind, so Italy could not continue to be a patchwork of small states and kingdoms. It had to be forged into a single unified republic within a wider alliance of nations. This unification alone could be the basis of Italian liberty. Following this model, secret societies were set up in France, Germany, Switzerland, and Poland. Mazzini's relentless opposition to monarchy Mazzini's relentless opposition to monarchy and his vision of democratic republics frightened the conservatives. Metternich described him as the most dangerous enemy of our social order. That's it for today. I'll meet you guys in the next video.